Hi, everyone. We are live. This is our 9th installment of our weekly webinar series. My name is Ashley Young, and I am the Prisoner and Family Coordinator of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. Our mission is to defend civil liberties and freedoms, promote a fair U.S. criminal justice system, and advocate for the rights of political prisoners targeted in the War on Terror. You can find our previous webinars on topics ranging from COVID-19 in federal prison, the Holy Land 5, to Black Lives and the death of Mohammed Yusuf in prison, and much more on the video section of our Facebook page, or go to our YouTube channel, which is Civil Freedoms, and you can subscribe. So, when the pandemic first hit, CCF's legal director, Kathy Manley, jumped into action and identified our most vulnerable people in prison, launching what is now called our Prison Release Project. Kathy compiled a list of over 30 prisoners who we wanted to file compassionate release motions for, and we sent all these prisoners letters. We have spoken about this project many times here and given you updates. And I just wanted to take a quick moment and recognize that this project could have only been made possible through the support of our donors and through the Proteus Rise Together Fund. And I want to give a huge thank you and ask for your continued donations so that we can keep our work going. The conditions in prison during COVID are awful. Hundreds of people in facilities are testing positive. Men and women do not have the ability to socially distance. They are not given adequate medical care. They are not given proper supplies, gloves, face masks. Testing is not readily available. It's just an incredibly scary place to be during this pandemic. Just a few days ago, we learned that one of our men in prison from the Holy Land 5, Mufid Abdulkader, has tested positive, and as of this morning, his facility has over 500 cases. Just last month, we tragically lost one of our men in prison due to COVID, Mohammed Yusuf, who died from COVID with no medical treatment. And prior to him, one of our other men, Ibrahim El-Gabrowni, tested positive and has been in the hospital and has been hospitalized from prison fighting for his life. Now, the cases that the coalition support are incredibly difficult. These defendants have been demonized for years. They have been labeled as terrorists. They have been treated poorly at every turn. We have been experiencing some really hard losses in court and bad decisions from judges. But this project literally has the power to potentially save lives, and that's what we're fighting for. And thank God we finally got the good news that we have been hoping for so many months. Today, I am very, very pleased and incredibly grateful that we are here celebrating a huge CCF victory for one of our men in prison. Sami Hassoun has been granted compassionate release. We finally won, and hopefully we will have more to come. Sami has been unjustly incarcerated for the past decade, and with this win, not only will he be out of harm's way from COVID in the prisons, but he will get over a decade of his life back, as he had over 10 years left on his sentence. We want to share with you the happiness of his family, who have been waiting a long time for a miracle, which they finally got. We have his mom, Siham. We have his younger brother, Ali, who are with us. And we also have with us today 2 CCF staff members, Mel Underbaki, our Executive Deputy Director, and Amit Gupta, the attorney who wrote the brilliant and winning motion that has freed Sami Hassoun. I want to remind everyone that you can type your questions into the comment box and we will answer them at the end of this series. You can ask questions to the family, to CCF staff, Now, first and foremost, I would love to start with Mel. One thing that I couldn't imagine having this webinar without Mel, because she created a relationship with Sami and his family many, many years ago. And myself, as an impacted family member who has a brother in prison, CCF was, for me, the only organization who offered any help to my brother and offered any help to me. And I think that rings true with this family. And when I spoke with Siham, Sami's mom, she told me that she was so excited and she wished that Mel was there with her to celebrate the win of her son being
Yes,
released.
that's true.
And I just wanted to highlight that relationship. And so first, Mel, can you tell me a little bit about how you first got to know Sami and his family, and why a case like his is part of one that the coalition supports and has been supporting?
Yeah, sure. And first, it is wonderful to be here celebrating for a change of us. Yeah. And I first met Siham by telephone when I called her to invite her to one of our family conferences. And I just want to say a little bit about those conferences to people that may not know about them. The Coalition for Civil Freedoms has been holding weekend family conferences for the past 9 years. And these are for families of people whose loved ones have been unjustly incarcerated in the war on terror. And these conferences are really important because they bring together family members to join together with other families who are in the same situation, where they have a loved one that is incarcerated unjustly, a father, a brother, and a son in a federal prison with outrageously long sentences. So we do things at these conferences, like we have workshops on a variety of topics. Like one we did in the past was how to deal with the media effectively, how to tell your story effectively. We do a lot of practice with that, and how to lobby Congress, and a lot more. And we usually have these conferences in the DC area. So in the last 3 years, we go to, with some of the family members who are able to stay an extra day, and we go and talk to their congressional representatives about the need for criminal justice reform is a normal topic. A few years back, we lobbied for the First Step Act, which did eventually pass. And the last time we were there, we were promoting our own bill, the Entrapment and Governmental Overreach Relief Act, which would hold the FBI to constitutional limits and prevent the kind of thing from happening to others that happened to Sami. And let's see, so I called Siham hoping she could come to our conference, and she wasn't able to come, and I believe this was a few years ago now. I think it was a word conflict, but we talked for a long time, and she told me about, what happened to Sami, and all of, about, the whole thing. It was really horrible story. And I said, I have 2 sons that are about Sami's age, so it really hit home to me. And I thought, I couldn't imagine anything worse than having one of them in prison, unjustly in prison for a long, long time. So anyway, we kept in touch over the years, and I've invited her every year to a family conference. As of yet, she wasn't able to, have not been able to come. But it's really great here being in the same webinar with the family celebrating this event here.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, Mel, what about Sami's case was one that would qualify as something that the Coalition for Civil Freedom support? Could you tell us a little bit about what happened to him?
Yeah. The first I saw of his case was a newspaper article, and they typically tell the government side of the story. And in this case, they've said something like that he had a plot to bomb something, but the informant tipped off the FBI. So I knew totally that's not true. So that's when I contacted Sami to find out his side of the story. And so we emailed a lot. Federal prisoners have access to email through the CoreLink system. So I talked to him and tried to visit him at one time, but never succeeded at that. But we emailed. They recommend a book of the Age of the Lone Wolf Terrorism, which I went out and bought. It's got a chapter about his story, and he told me they did a very good job with that story. So between the two, I found out, the story from Sami's point of view, what really happened. So it's in the spring of 2009, the FBI sent a confidential informant to befriend and, meet Sami and befriend him. And these informants, we see a lot of those in our cases, a lot of it, and they are paid a lot of money, like maybe $250,000 for one case. And it's not a good job. The FBI turns on informants a lot of times, so I do not recommend that job. But this guy, he was a lot older than Sami. I think his name was Nadim, might be wrong there, and so he became, like Sami said, he was like a father figure to him. And then, as I understand it, at the time, Sami was very vulnerable. He'd been through a lot of traumas. He's survived 2 wars, seen a lot of atrocities. He's in a new city with a job, trying to kind of help the family out and all that. And so his new friend, he really was flattered to have this older man that wanted to be friends with him. So he's just doing all these things to impress him, making up all kinds of stories, as I understand it. And they talked about different plots they could do, and the friend is leading all of this too. He's, and he talked to him for over a year. He pretended to be his friend for well over a year. So one of the plots that Sami was suggesting was overthrowing the city of Chicago and making a lot of money doing that. So you can see the kind of plot that Sami was suggesting. So it's not like something that he could have pulled off or that he even seriously thought of doing. But so the intendant, the informant talked to him like for over a year before he could even get him to, think seriously about doing anything. And so then Sami was, he's not really capable of this. The informant brought in 2 undercover FBI agents. And when they completed the plan, and they talked Sami into it. I think they gave Sami some money even, and I think Sami told me, he was telling these FBI agents there's no way he could do it. But he'd have the ideas, they'd have to do it. So they did. They got him a fake bomb. Then when he put it somewhere, they rushed in and arrested him. And so the short version of the story, but he's definitely somebody we're interested in. That's total unjust conviction.
It seems like very first-class entrapment, working on a very young man.
Yeah, very young, vulnerable man.
3 different government agents.
Yeah.
Trying to, find his vulnerabilities and capitalize on that. It's just awful. So awful. That happened in 2009.
2009, yeah.
Which means Sami has been arrested, incarcerated for over a decade now.
Yeah, over a decade. Mm-hmm.
Mel, being so close to Sami and also his family, how did you feel when you received the news that we had one compassionate release?
Yeah, really couldn't believe it. Yeah, I texted Siham right away. She was pretty happy too, so it was really awesome news. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mel.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have Mel on. It just highlights again that the Coalition for Civil Freedoms is the only organization who is in constant and direct contact with these people and their families. And now I would love to turn it over to the family, Siham and Sami's younger brother, Ali. So first, please tell us how you felt when you got the news that your son, your brother, after over a decade, has been granted compassionate release and is going to be free.
Go ahead.
We jumped on each other. We cried a lot. I don't know.
It was like a dream come true, you know.
Yes,
it was
it's
like no one believed it, and like I was like, I've never cried like that before, you know.
We cried, and
we
never had this happiness since Sami get to the.
Like I've never seen my mom like run like that, run around, jumping around.
I never.
It was like the best moment ever.
It was the best moment ever, really.
So I remember
I can't describe the feelings. I can't. I don't know.
I read an article that Mel had sent me, and there was a quote from you, Siham, where you had said that you had been hoping for some miracle that your
Yes.
son could be back in between you and your other son. And so is this the miracle you've been hoping for?
Yes, and 2 weeks ago, I dreamt my husband, and my son, three of us had the same dream. And I shared it with Mel. And Mel, she told me, no, I have a feeling that Sammy will be soon with you.
So we all three of us, we had like a dream that Sammy got out and like he was with us. Yeah, it was all in the same week. It was like one after the other.
Yes.
We all jumped. He
Knocking
jumped.
the door.
Yeah, he jumped and came out. And like 2 weeks after we heard the news he got out.
Oh my God.
It was
It was
oh
a
my.
miracle.
It was
a miracle.
yeah.
And,
That's just great. I love hearing this. I wish that you guys lived closer so we could all celebrate together.
yes,
Oh yeah.
I hope so. But
So tell me then, Ali, I know you were very young when your brother was taken from you.
Yeah.
But from all accounts, I hear that you guys are incredibly close.
Yes, we are.
So I kind of wanted people to know what effect this has had on you. I want people to know what it's like to be a family member who has a loved one who has been unjustly incarcerated, and what this past decade has been like for you guys and for your family.
Well, I mean, like when I was little, like I was very close to my brother, like, and I still am. But like when it first happened, I would always wonder where my brother is, and like I would always ask my parents, like when is Sammy coming home, and it was a huge challenge for me, like I've never been away from my brother, and like.
How old
I
were you?
was shocked. He was shocked. I just.
Huh? Can you repeat that, please?
How old were you when he was arrested?
I was 6 years old.
6?
Yeah, like five or 6 years old.
Oh, I forgot. 5.5, I think.
Yeah, like around that age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I lost 25 pounds in 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. 25 pounds, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was terrible. I don't want to remember those days even.
It was a struggle, yeah.
It was very hard.
And Sammy was very young when he was arrested, correct?
Yes, I got sick, but then after 1 month, I realized I have my other son. I want to take care of him. Otherwise, I'm not existing now.
Yeah.
I struggled a lot. I went through a lot. Actually, the whole family went through a lot.
So he was I think 20 when he was arrested.
21.
Yeah, he was like 21. Yeah.
And then he was sentenced to 23 years?
23 years.
Correct.
So he was sentenced to a longer time than he had actually been alive for at that point.
Yes.
Which is incredibly daunting. And scary. And so what difficulties has he had in prison? I mean, he's been there for the last decade. So could you tell us a little bit about what that's been like for him? And also, let me go back a little bit. Tell us about Sammy. Okay, because I've never met him. Mel knows him.
God,
Sammy? So tell us about your son.
Sammy, he's like the most amazing person that you can ever meet. Like he's lovely. Like he's his intelligence is like off the chart. Like he's super smart, and like he's the most caring person like you can ever meet. He loves to help people. He always makes sure people are okay.
Yes.
And
that's right.
he will do anything in his power to make sure people are happy, and to anything in his power to make help people.
Yeah,
he's amazing.
He's my first son, and for 16 years I have him my lonely child. And I was he was sick with this familial Mediterranean familial disease. I don't know. I felt like something. They took my heart. I felt. Yeah. I don't know. I cannot describe those nights. How I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do nothing. I couldn't do nothing. But thank God, thank God, thank God. After this suffering, after this, all these years, thank you guys. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. I don't know.
So what has Sami been doing? What are his interests? And do you know what he has any plans to do with his unexpected release, and what life will be like when he, so he is not free yet. He is in police detention, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So does he have any ideas of what he wants to do? Anything he wants to pursue? What has he been working on, and stuff like that?
Thank God he has a huge family support him. Like he can find easily a job.
Like throughout his process, like throughout this past decade, he's been studying a lot, reading a lot. He graduated from college. He finished college. He got his degree from Ohio University.
Yes.
Yeah, and he
speaks like 4 languages.
He learned a new language.
Yeah, he speaks Arabic, French, English, and
Spanish, and a little bit of Italian.
Yeah. He loves to speak languages. Yeah. He's
Amazing.
very talented, and he's very talented. He draw.
He loves to draw.
He's very talented. Yeah.
Okay, what did he get his degree in?
He got. Yes.
This is the degree right here. It's
from Ohio University.
It's an associate in science.
Nice.
Yeah, Ohio University. Yep.
Yeah, and he has a lot of certificates too.
Amazing.
Yes.
He
worked a lot on himself. Yeah.
He's been trying to continue his education.
Yes.
Was that difficult for him doing the distance learning?
Yeah, it was, because how do I say this?
Challenge for him.
It was a challenge because he had to wait. He had to mail stuff to the college, and it would take sometimes it would take 2 weeks for them to respond back. But it was a challenge. But he stayed strong, and he was able to finish.
But finally, he did it.
Wow.
Yes. We support him a lot too. Yeah.
So now, for families like mine who still have loved ones who are incarcerated and for possibly many more years, do you have any words of hope for them?
Of course. Yeah, I just want them not to lose hope. Keep learning, work on themselves. Never lose hope. Miracle happen.
You never know what's gonna happen next.
Keep the faith.
Keep your faith for.
Yes. And with your help, guys. Yes. With all, it's an amazing job you did.
Never lose hope.
Okay. I love that. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks. So last but certainly not least, I want to turn it over to the man of the hour, Amit Gupta, our CCF staff attorney. So I met Amit for the first time in the fall. Mel mentioned that we have a family conference every year. So we invited Amit to come and speak to our families about community organizing. We also had him speak about a project on surveillance that he was working on through Project South. And after Amit came to our family conference, we just really connected with him as a team. We loved his energy, his interest, and then we developed more of a relationship with him. And after Kathy started compiling a list of people who were vulnerable, specifically vulnerable to getting COVID in prison, Amit jumped in and is working on these compassionate release motions with us. Amit, could you tell us, well, first of all, how did you feel getting the news that your compassionate release motion was granted and that Sami was going to be released and over 10 years were going to be cut off his sentence?
Well, I was thrilled. I mean, these are not the kinds of cases that even the most veteran attorneys ever get to win. Unfortunately, the law being what it is, a lot of what federal criminal defense attorneys do, including in this case, is to try to negotiate the best plea deal that they can get. So it's very rare that anyone in this line of work, no matter how much experience they have, no matter how great of an attorney they are, no matter how learned they might be, it's very rare that we ever get good news. So to hear that we got some good news in this case was thrilling to me. So I immediately got on the computer and emailed the team, and I was so happy to be able to spread the good news instead of having to write another depressing letter to another disappointed family member. So I was thrilled.
So tell us a little bit about the motion you prepared for Sami. He has an illness that makes him incredibly vulnerable, and it's a very rare illness. And tell us a little bit about the arguments you were able to make for him, and then I would also like to hear the judge's very good decision that they handed down.
Well, absolutely. Before I do that, I just want to mention, I am really happy to be here. I mean, I noticed one of the things that made me get involved with CCF. You mentioned that I was working with Project South. So Project South is based in the U.S. South and works on issues related to the U.S. South and the Global South. It's a Black community organization rooted in the Black radical tradition, and so they brought me on board in order to address and to try to work with their legal team on putting together advocacy materials to challenge surveillance throughout the South. And of course, it was through that effort that I met some of the other impacted family members in the South that have had to deal with cases similar to these. And that's, of course, how I ended up at CCF. The reason I've stayed involved and the reason I ended up getting involved in this case was because it really is important to me that CCF is led by and founded by and run by the family members of people who have been affected by the war. I mean, even on this conference, I'm the odd man out here. Everyone else here is either a close family member or a close friend of somebody who's been affected by the attempt to turn the war on terror into a domestic campaign to criminalize mostly Muslim youths. So to me, it was really important. There's not a lot of organizations, unfortunately, in this community that are willing to stand with the targets and the victims of this war on terrorism. There's too many organizations that want to overlook these issues because they don't think that they're politically salient. But I think especially now what we're seeing outside with so much of the country up in arms over the racism and the discrimination of the legal system, I think that myth should be put to rest. So I just wanted to say that before I got into this case. As far as the arguments that we made, I mean, essentially, we've touched on a lot of them. I mean, as Mel mentioned, Sami has, as much as Sami's a very bright and very strong person, he's also been through a lot of horrible things that really nobody should have to live through. He's survived 2 major wars and seen so many people being brutally killed. And I think that adds to the injustice of the original prosecution, that they preyed on somebody that they knew was vulnerable, that they knew they could manipulate. A young man who was sick, who had a genetic disorder, who had survived the horrendous trauma of living in 2 war zones, who was living in a new country. They spent over a year coaxing Sami into agreeing to participate in some sort of bomb plot. And what's notable about it is that some of the worst aspects of the ultimate conviction were aspects of the plot that were engineered by the informants, not by Sami. So, for example, the FBI and undercover agents who were trying to entice Sami, they asked him to come up with a bomb plot. He suggested that they use smoke bombs in order to avoid any casualties. It was the informants that insisted, no, we should use real bombs. At various points when the plot started to fall apart, the FBI informants kept pressuring Sami to actually come up with a detailed plot so that they could then present it in the court and say, look, he wrote this detailed plot about how to bomb people. anytime that the plot started to fall apart, they would offer him money. It was just any kind of manipulative things that they could do to ensure that this crazy plot would go forward, just so they could present it in the court. And what's notable about that is that the justification of the FBI and spokespeople for the government that defend these kinds of tactics have used is to say, well, what if the FBI hadn't been there? What if it wasn't an undercover agent? Everything in these kinds of prosecutions shows that if it weren't for the FBI, it's very unlikely that any of these things would have even happened. It's difficult to imagine all of the various steps that the FBI took actually happening on their own. And in fact, they haven't happened on their own, despite all of the years that they've done this for over a decade and a half that the FBI has essentially entrapped large numbers of Muslim youths. There hasn't been some separate campaign of armed groups recruiting people and having them carry out these plots. There have been a handful of attacks, but none of them happened in this way. None of them involved, armed groups sending their agents to come and recruit vulnerable people. And the irony is that in the last 15 years, the only people that have done that is the FBI. So I think when it came to making the argument, part of the argument the brunt of the argument focused on Sami's medical condition. Sami has a rare genetic disorder for which, for the first 2 years of his incarceration, he wasn't even given medication for it, which put him in excruciating pain. The prison staff didn't even believe him when he asked for his medication, despite having been diagnosed as a child. And so for the first 2 years of his incarceration, he was in just brutal pain. And what we pointed out was that according to the Centers for Disease Control, people with conditions like Sami's are the most vulnerable for contracting coronavirus and developing serious complications from it. And it's not an idle threat, unfortunately, as even the House of Representatives, the House Judiciary Committee noted. Prisons are probably the worst place. U.S. prisons, federal prisons, are probably the worst place in the entire world to be right now if you're trying to avoid coronavirus. The rates of infection inside federal prisons are much higher relative to the general population. In fact, we were able to make that argument in our submissions, and I think it's worth noting that the judge in our case, Judge Gettleman, I never submitted anything to his court. I appeared pro hoc vice, which basically means I'm not a normal member of their court, and I was basically a visiting attorney. I wasn't sure which way he was going to rule or which factors he was going to consider the most significant, but he did note a few different things. One thing he noted is that these really aren't normal times. These aren't normal circumstances with the pandemic. And it really has brought to light, he didn't point this part out, this is me now, but it really has brought to light how, uncivilized and barbaric the prison system is in the United States, at the state level and the federal level, that, you can really tell a lot about a country by how it treats the people it is imprisoned, how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. And I think the fact that it's been allowed to get this bad in federal prisons where hundreds of people are dying is a testament to just how much the entire prison system, even in normal circumstances, needs to be re-examined. The other thing that I think was notable about Judge Gettleman's opinion is that he did mention the role that informants played. And so he did condemn Sami's conduct, but he noted the influence that informants played in bringing that conduct about. So I think that's notable, is that many federal judges, not just in this passing ruling, but in previous cases as well, have noted kind of the absurdity of the federal government creating these plots and then having their informants make decisions that ultimately weigh on what kind of sentence is appropriate when everyone gets convicted. And that it is kind of an absurdity and that it is an injustice. So I think all of those were notable parts of our advocacy, and I'm hoping that as the project continues, that we won't just get good rulings, but we'll also have more rulings that can bring to light some of these injustices in the prison system. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm back. Thank you so much, Ahmed. So is the judge who granted compassionate release, is this the same judge who sentenced Sami?
Yeah. So the way the First Step Act works is that this was a reform that was passed a couple of years ago. It was one of those rare, steps of progress in an administration that's otherwise tried to roll back almost every existing reform that's ever been put in place. But somehow we were able to get Democrats and Republicans to go along with this law that created at least some means to reduce prison sentences and to grant people who've been incarcerated means of release. And what the bill basically did was it said that that in the event that a prisoner applies to his own prison or to the Bureau of Prisons for release as a decision made by the warden, after 30 days have lapsed and he hasn't, and that prisoner hasn't received a response or has received a negative response, the incarcerated person can actually apply to their sentencing judge to have the sentencing judge make the decision about compassionate release. It's not open-ended. There are all sorts of criteria you have to meet, and essentially what we argued is that the coronavirus, in conjunction with the medical conditions that some of our CCF prisoners face, including Sami, create what we would call an extraordinary and compelling reason to reconsider the sentence.
Great. I think it's I just was so happy that this judge mentioned in his decision about the government's role in this case. And frankly, I think it's pretty unprecedented. I'm not sure that I've ever heard that before. So I hope that this judgment can be used for other purposes down the line in some way to help other prisoners who are facing the same injustice, being entrapped by the government into a crime that would have otherwise never been committed, and that the crime isn't even real. And so is there any, as far as the informant's role, which we've spoken about a lot, is there anything that that has any sort of limitation on the role that these government agents can play in people who they're targeting, or is it kind of a free-for-all?
Well, so here's the issue, and it's worth noting that it's not like this in other countries. In other countries, a person who's entrapped isn't put in the position of trying to prove that they were entrapped. Instead, these operations are essentially not permitted at all. The way it works in the United States is, of course, you're not allowed to entrap somebody legally, but the process works by saying, well, entrapment defense is only applied to people who weren't already predisposed to committing criminal acts. Now, in my view, that on its own is highly questionable, because one of the bedrock principles of our legal system is supposed to be innocence until proven guilty. You should never be put in a position where you have to disprove that you're predisposed to criminal activity. They should have the burden of proof of showing that you're guilty of it. So I think this particular rule is out of step with the rest of the way criminal law works in the United States. But essentially, what happens there is that as long as the government can kind of create a story to convince the jury that you were going to do it anyway, which allows them to bring in all sorts of evidence that they normally wouldn't be able to bring in, like your political views, your religious practices, all of these kinds of things that normally would just be considered, protected speech that has no relevance to criminal law. As a result of these kinds of unfriendly Supreme Court rulings on entrapment isn't often a defense. What is a little bit distinct, however, and we kind of saw that a little bit in this compassionate release ruling, is that when it comes to sentencing, judges are permitted to consider all of the various factors that led to someone's conviction. So in that aspect, it's actually not completely unprecedented. There are other cases, including other CCF cases, where during the sentencing, judges made it very clear that they didn't approve the government's conduct, including I think the Liberty City 7 case in Florida, where a bunch of basically poor people who worked with a community organization were manipulated into swearing some kind of oath of allegiance to Al Qaeda or something like that. And the judge in that case was very, very clear about how she felt that it was an injustice, but that the law didn't bar the government from nonetheless introducing the evidence that they did. However, it can be brought up in sentencing, and in the past, we have been able, and there have been cases where there have been cases where defense attorneys were able to get below guideline sentences, where that is sentences that technically fall below the recommended guidelines. And in this case, I think it is fair to say, obviously I can't read the judge's mind, but I do think it's fair to say that based on, at least from my reading of it, based on the framing of his ruling, that he did recognize, at least in part, that the role of the informants was significant, and that it really didn't the conviction didn't just purely reflect on Sami being some kind of criminal or something like that. That there were other circumstances that weighed against keeping Sami in prison.
Incredible, thank you. To the family, when Sami was first arrested, do you remember how many years he was originally facing for this entrapment?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Continue.
Do you mean like how much like the government wanted for him?
Yeah, how much the government wanted from him.
I think it was
he could get up to.
They wanted like 32 years.
Yeah, that's what they wanted. Yeah.
And then the attorneys wanted 20 years, and then the judge finally gave him 23 years.
Yeah.
Way too long. Way too long.
Yes.
They wanted the most possible years for him.
So Sami, we got Amit got a message from Core Links, the email system from federal prison, that said, Sami's email is no longer working.
No longer.
Which means Sami has been moved. So have you heard from him? He's in, I believe, ICE detention right now.
Yes, he's in there.
Okay. And
he's in ICE detention now.
Do you know what next steps for him are? Is this something where you have to get an immigration attorney, or do you know anything about when he could possibly be sent back to Lebanon, or how long he might have to wait in detention?
I really hope from my heart, like he'll be deported very soon.
But we don't know. We don't really know anything right now.
We really don't know nothing. I don't want him to stay long there in the ICE.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want him because I didn't spoke with him yesterday. So I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just praying.
Kathy, the legal director, who's
yes.
She's been speaking to, I think, one of the people in who works at ICE, who's like
manager.
Yes.
I think one of the issues has been that it's difficult to find flights given the pandemic, but
that's true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely in the pipeline.
So hopefully he's not waiting a lot there.
Yeah, I'm hoping he'll be back in Lebanon by the end of next week. So.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And we'll want to see lots of photos when he gets home.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
So you guys, we have a couple questions coming in. Anyone listening, if you have questions for the family, for Mel, for Amit, please type them in now. We have a question regarding Sami's case. It says, was the informant in Sami's case being paid by the FBI or also seeking a favorable plea in their own case, something besides money? So I guess what we've seen in a lot of cases is that the people who the government uses as informants actually have charges of their own and are seeking, so they make a deal with the government where they basically work for them as an informant instead of going to jail or to prison or facing charges of their own that have come against them. Do we know what the case was with the informant in Sami's?
I mean, I think it was just for money. I don't think there was somebody trying to dodge criminal charges of their own, but I could be wrong. Obviously, I was still an undergrad when the trial happened. So.
Yeah. Well, we're not really sure on.
I think one thing that's worth noting is that the people that end up getting involved in informing. I mean, some of them are really desperate people. Some of them are people who are put in a very difficult situation, but some of them really are just twisted people. Like, I mean, the informant in the Newberg case was just somebody who was living large, just making hundreds of thousands of dollars to manipulate young men into engaging in whatever kinds of even conduct that doesn't even arise to what a normal person would think of as terrorism, just minuscule acts that under the laws being what they are would qualify as terrorism offenses. So unfortunately, that's a real problem. I think that's another area where there really needs to be reform, is looking at the kinds of incentives that the FBI is allowed to give people so that they can do this.
And we have one of our viewers said, "I'm astonished that this is the same judge who convicted him. It is extraordinary miscarriage of justice to be corrected by the same man who committed it." I think we can all definitely share that sentiment.
Well, it's worth noting. I mean, Sami pled. He didn't go to trial, so ultimately, I don't know how much of a role the judge would have had in being able to not convict him. But I mean, it's worth noting that in this case, we got a great ruling in an area of law where there actually is a lot of discretion for judges. So I was really pleased to hear that Judge Gettleman made the decision that I think we all agree was the right one. Unfortunately, in other cases and at the trial phase, oftentimes judges don't have the discretion to make the decisions that we want them to, just because the law, being what it is, it puts defendants in such a difficult position. That's exactly why so many people end up pleading instead of even going to trial.
I was reading a statistic last night that said 90% of federal cases end in plea deals. 2% of defendants go to trial. The other 8 have charges dismissed. That's insane. So Amit, for moving forward, since we don't see that things are getting better in prisons with COVID, we see that they are probably getting worse. Cases are still going up. The number of facilities being affected are increasing. So is the prisoner release project going to continue, and for how long do you foresee?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's worth emphasizing. We were doing this even before the pandemic. So the law permits. The law isn't limited to the pandemic. The law it says that any kind of extraordinary, compelling reason for release is grounds to at least apply for it, and that includes things like age-related illnesses and other things that we were mostly focusing on people of a certain age prior to the pandemic. But we're definitely going to continue it in terms of what the public can do. One thing is that groups like ours remain short-staffed. I mean, we're all doing this part-time and in our free time. And of course, Kathy, as we all know, is just constantly flooded with work. So I think one thing is to make sure that organizations like ours can actually sustain themselves by bringing in additional legal support. But outside of things like fundraising, I think one thing that the public can do, especially now, the situation being what it is to actually have people contact their congresspeople. It's not every day that I would see much hope in trying to contact a member of Congress, but I think given the circumstances given the pandemic, given the outrage over the police killing of George Floyd, and the kind of renewed attention to how the criminal legal system is so deeply discriminatory from the point of arrest all the way to imprisonment, I think now is a good time for people to call their representatives and to demand that their representatives look into putting pressure on the Bureau of Prisons to start releasing more people. I mean, the truth is, we shouldn't have to file compassionate release motions for each prisoner. The fact remains that these prisons are not safe places for anyone, including people who don't have, genetic disorders, even people who don't have medical vulnerabilities. So we should be working right now, the public should be demanding right now that we release as many people as possible and as many people that it's feasible to release.
Absolutely, 100%. Mel is a great person who talks about this grassroots efforts. Things do not change unless people in the community demand it. Mel, did you want to real quick talk about the action item that we have for Mufid, calling the prison and demanding him medical care real quick?
I don't have, people can go to our Facebook page. I do not have that in front of me.
Another thing maybe that you might want to mention is piggybacking off of what Ahmed just said, calling your members of Congress, writing your members of Congress. If you want to briefly describe CCF's congressional newsletter that we just drafted.
Yeah, we have a, I don't really have that on top of my head either, Ashley, I'm sorry. But we're trying to regularly contact a group of Congress people and their staff. We hope to get to know them so they'll respond to us more, but I sort of recommend that for everybody. If you get to know your representatives, they'll try to help you, they'll do more for you. So I would say to tell everybody to go out and do that. And right now, as you said, it's a crisis in our prisons. And the BOP was supposed to be releasing people, and they're not. So they need to get the pressure from the grassroots. They need to get that to inspire them to do what they should be doing. And I just keep wondering, why don't they release people? I don't understand it. Yeah.
So I think that the CCF congressional newsletter was drafted in mind to keep these topics on the forefront of prison reform, of release, of the dire situation in prison, to keep those ideas in the forefront of our elected officials' minds so that people like Sami Hassoun can be released before something terrible happens to him. So definitely, if you need help engaging with your lawmakers, if you've never done it before, contact us. We can help. Before I went to the family conference, I'll admit I was not a registered voter. I had never engaged with my lawmakers before ever. And now I've gone lobbying maybe 7 times. And I am in constant contact with them. So if you're interested in doing this for prison reform, for the safety of people who are incarcerated, for the efforts of CCF, please reach out to us. We can help you take simple steps to engage with your lawmakers. So before we leave, I wanted to give any last thoughts to the family. Anything you want to leave viewers with, anything that we forgot to mention, or anything like that?
No, thank you. I just want to thank everyone in CCF. Kathy, we met her last year at the convention center. I was so happy that I met her. Thanking Mel, thanking, I don't know the names, Mr. Amir, you, and I don't know all the names. So one, I'm thanking each one in this, in the CCF, and God bless you. God bless you.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for helping us and sticking by our side, and thank you for Mel.
I wish from my heart she was with us.
we wish everyone was with us so we can celebrate. And Mr. Amif, thank you for all your hard work.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm praying for each person have the same situation like my son, and each person at prison. I just want them to have faith, to have the hope. I mean, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give us the opportunity to talk to you too.
Thank you for having us here.
Yeah.
Of course, I think that's the best message we can possibly end on. There are hundreds of people like you and me who have loved ones in prison, and it is a very sad and lonely and isolating experience. And so when I spoke to you, Siham, the other night, and you told me, repeated to me, not to ever give up hope. I hope that message reaches other people, because I think it's really important. And I think that your son's release and his win is a win for all of us.
Yes.
We're all celebrating with you.
Thank you.
And to our supporters, please continue to support us. This work cannot be done without your support and donations. We cannot continue this project without your support and donations. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being here today, and hopefully we can ride this wave, this win, to future releases. And Amit, thank you so much for your efforts, for your tireless work. Mel and the family, thank you guys so much.